Final Fantasy XVI is a game that I can heartily recommend. However, that recommendation comes with some hefty caveats and provisos. So stick around to see what they are. Welcome everybody, my name is Doragon and this is my review of Final Fantasy XVI. I have always appreciated Final Fantasy from afar. From its stupendous graphics, 13 still looks stunning 2 generations later for example, to fantastically cosplayable protagonists. The mechanics have always been super sound, even when evolving, and the fanbase has always been kind and welcoming in my experiences. But Final Fantasy has never really done anything for me personally, outside of 7. But 16 changed that. With a pair of brothers at the heart of the narrative, I immediately had empathy for this story and its characters, with it reminding me of my brother and myself. The European medieval setting and Tolkien-esque high fantasy had my interest but not my purchase. Until they dropped a demo on the PlayStation 5 store 2 weeks before launch. This demo was 2 hours long and nailed everything that was good about the game. Your progress carried forward into the final release as well, meaning you didn't have to do the tutorial again. It was superb and confident marketing. So how did the final product stack up? I want to talk about the narrative first, as this carried the entire experience for me. The core of it is the bond between 2 brothers, the elder dark-haired brother and the younger blonde-haired brother. This immediately reminded me of me and my younger brother, as we fit the exact same description. As the elder brother, I also know the feeling of that sense of protection and duty towards the younger brother that our protagonist Clive feels towards Joshua, and it is beautifully portrayed in the first 2 hours / demo. This is a powerful early narrative connection to form, and I know my specific situation created such a bond with these characters, but it will be the same or similar for many other siblings who play this game. The narrative leverages that bond that, even if you don't have it in real life, is formed well enough in the narrative to carry you to the same ends, to explore themes of betrayal, grief, acceptance, and growth exceptionally in the first 10 hours or so, depending of course on how many side quests you do. I'll come back to those later. You are taken on a journey of personal discovery for Clive, from hitting rock bottom in that demo's introduction through to growing into a primary hope for the world's continued survival. He's also the first, older protagonist of the series, using that term loosely, as he's in his mid-30s by the middle of the game through to the end. The rough age of many of the game's players, myself included, once again giving a powerful connection to the audience with minimal work. The high fantasy surrounding the narrative paves the way for multiple narrative MacGuffins to be used to good effect. The icons are the first of these MacGuffins, and offer some of the biggest fantasy moments in the games. Essentially, an icon is an old-world deity that imbues its power upon a mortal, allowing them to use a portion of its power and transform into their earthly form. Some areas of the world celebrate these icons, others look to them in battle, while others persecute them through fear of their power, and so on. The people who have these powers are called dominants, and they form the majority of the big players in the character roster. Mother Crystals are another MacGuffin used to further the narrative. In the lore, they supply magic to the lands, allowing easy use of water, fire, stone, and other elements of the icons. But they are used to great narrative effect towards the end of the first act, and reveal a further twist towards the end of the third. They form a core part of the second act's story and gameplay, and pave the way to some of the more spectacular and memorable moments within the game. There are some more, but outlining them would spoil the story for you, and I don't want to do that.
The narrative itself is sold incredibly well, with solid, believable performances from every member of cast. No matter the moment, stakes, interaction, and so on, everyone delivers performances that make you believe in this world without the need for conscious suspension of disbelief. This means the writing and direction is great too, as without these aspects, coupled with the acting, animation, and editing, this story would never deliver on its promise. The narrative itself is a sweeping tale tackling political intrigue, corruption, betrayal, slavery, and religion. It speaks to many aspects we currently face in everyday life, and wraps it all up in a fantasy wardrobe. Starting like a medieval betrayal with political stakes that could change the face of the Valasthian continent, Final Fantasy XVI deftly transitions into a tale of freeing enslaved kin, before tackling a threat that could and will wipe out all of humanity if we don't stop them. None of these factors sound like they should fit together. Yet Final Fantasy XVI weaves this mismatched tale together beautifully. Are there aspects that don't sit as well, are a bit weird, or maybe just there for shock factor? Yes, there are. But they don't detract from the overall narrative for me. The stakes are real. Characters don't have plot armor, and the emotional weight of this story weighs upon the player as it does the characters. I wept before the final battle. The moment in question delivered with weight, power, reverence, and understanding. To my emotions, it was destructively beautiful. All of these factors combine for a great fantasy tale. I'm not sure if it will be the best story in gaming in 2023, but it is very impactful, satisfying, and enjoyable regardless. Game design is where the game suffers slightly, and is one of the primary caveats I mentioned at the start of my review. Let's start with the narrative deliverance. As expected, most of it comes through cutscenes. Beautiful, pre-rendered cutscenes. But I found these scenes incredibly jarring. Not because they are only rendered at 30 frames per second, or that they go on as long as some of the Metal Gear Solid 4 cutscenes, having your controller turn off power saving settings. But it's the way that they are presented. This is a PlayStation 5 exclusive game at the time of writing. We know a PC release is coming, and many gaming PCs are far more powerful than the PlayStation 5. But God of War, Horizon, Ratchet & Clank, Returnal & Co. have shown how seamless story moments and gameplay can be on the PlayStation 5 system with its super fast loading. But Final Fantasy XVI uses multiple cuts to black in the same conversation. Prime example. You'll cut to black as Clive is about to impart information upon a companion. Now this is a perfectly legitimate storytelling technique. You as the player already know the information, so you don't need to hear it again. The cut to black allows a minor time skip to the end of the exposition to then allow advancement of the narrative. Too many times in Final Fantasy XVI, however, do you cut to black simply to get to a different camera angle, and that exposition dump then happens regardless. This is bad in multiple ways. Each cut to black is predicated by a stop in the otherwise free-flowing conversation, taking you out of the moment at hand. The camera will pan once a character stops talking, then cut to black. It will then fade back in at a different angle whilst also panning, before coming to rest on the face of whomever is talking, before they then continue. You can literally end up with a break of 10 seconds between two flowing sentences from the same character multiple times in one conversation. If someone spoke to me like this in real life, I'd be calling them an ambulance because I'd be worried about their health. The characters regularly appear to be having some form of stroke or mental attack from the way the conversations are animated and edited. It is horrible to watch. It's completely jarring, and it destroys any sense of immersion. This issue is throughout the game as well. It's not like this was a rushing to finish latter development thing. This constant cut to black to fade back into the same scene is from start to finish. It's a design choice. Whoever made that choice needs to go back into education, because I know children of 6 and 7 years old who can present a story better than this one was presented. Unfortunately, this issue is made more prevalent by the design of many of the side quests and a fair chunk of the main quests. I'm going to show you some gameplay in the background here. This is a main narrative quest at around the midpoint of the game. It isn't the first example of this design, nor is it the last. What you are seeing is an investigation, trying to figure out who is convincing children to steal passes at a certain royal checkpoint. This entire quest is comprised of go talk to another person conversations. Every person you speak to seems to not know what is going on, but knows someone who might. So you as the player are constantly entering new conversations, with their constant fades to black, less than 20 meters apart from the previous one that you just interacted with. And this process repeats 7 or 8 times in this one story mission. At best, these two design choices colliding are disengaging, meaning it literally takes you out of all immersion of the game. At worst, and this was the end of the spectrum that I was closer to while playing, it makes you want to put the game down and never pick it back up, because it's boring, tiresome, and difficult to witness. This is a mid-game story mission that has bored me to the point of nearly quitting. This is the follow-up to an absolutely titanic battle that is full of raw and powerful emotion. Two icons and foes going toe-to-toe in a battle to end all battles. This walk and talk, with all of its cuts, fades, and unsynced lip movements, follows this bombastic battle. I understand that a narrative needs to ebb and flow to have impetus and impact, but this is a screeching halt. And again, this isn't the only time this happens throughout the course of the game. Now, I will come to some positives on game design and mechanics, because they are here and they are strong. But the crux of my review is that there are caveats to the strength of this release, and I feel that you should have these fairly front-loaded, so if you do decide to play, you know what you're getting into. One of those caveats is fairly front-loaded. It's one of the first things you do in the game, and it supposedly affects the way that you experience the game thereafter. This is the choice between story-focused or action-focused. Now, my first question is, why should I have to choose between those two things? I want the in-game action to be good, and I want the story to be good. To me, these things are inseparable. A good story and good action need to come together to make a good game, and in my experience, on either choice, they do. So what on earth is this choice about? What does it achieve? Story offers some accessibility options, but this isn't outlined effectively in this start game screen. Action is the game as it was originally designed. Now, I want to talk quickly about those accessibility settings of the game. While they exist in Final Fantasy XVI, so it's better than something like Pokemon Scarlet Violet, which has none, they are a bit weird and negatively impactful to the game. Accessibility in Final Fantasy XVI is done through rings that can be equipped on Clive in the game's inventory. These can offer things like automatic dodges, larger parry windows, automatic complex combos, auto companion commands, and so on. The problem is, you can only equip 3 at a time, and none of these rings help people with colourblindness, hearing, or sight challenges, for example. There is one thing in settings that gives visual cues for audio in the game, but it's kind of always there, because there's always noise. The challenges are compounded by the fact that you can't equip items to improve Clive's damage, healing, icon powers, and so on if you utilise the accessibility rings. It's good to see something being done for accessibility outside of the PlayStation Studios development teams, and Creative Business Unit 3 should be applauded for their efforts and a new and interesting take. But like with many games that aren't from PlayStation Studios, when you compare this implementation, even to a game from 5 years ago like God of War 2018, it pales in comparison. Final Fantasy, due to the turn-based RPG nature of the series in the past, has previously been quite disability accessible by nature. 16, however, feels like a big step backwards and disappointing compared to many competitors. Then performance and resolution modes are in Final Fantasy 16, but I'm not sure that either does their job well. I definitely got higher frames on the frame rate performance mode, but I don't think it hits 60 FPS too regularly. Now, most of these observations aren't measured with any accurate equipment. This is naked eye perception for the most part. For me, that frame rate mode felt more like 40 to 45 frames per second for the majority of the game. But with that option, resolution was swinging wildly, from native 4K all the way down to 1080p. Why 1080p? I'm not sure, but from my on-device recordings, that is the lowest the footage reached. And this swing in both frames and resolution, it is noticeable to the naked eye. I have had a friend say that Clive looks like a PlayStation 3 era character. For reference, here is an in-game shot of Lightning from Final Fantasy XIII, an actual PlayStation 3 game and character. In certain moments, I can see his point, especially when the resolution swings so low. But here is Clive in his 4K glory, and the differences are obvious. These modes, they don't really affect the game in any meaningful standard, so I question their inclusion at all. Even on the graphics resolution mode, resolution and frames swing wildly. With that being the case, I wish they hadn't included either option, and instead just focused on optimization to have the game run smoothly at a locked resolution and frame rate. 1800p and 45 frames per second permanently would have been far better than the mad swings we ended up with, no matter what option we chose. There's then the RPG elements. I'll talk more about the impact of this a little bit later, but they don't really exist in 16. It's an action-adventure game, not an RPG. As a player, you cannot affect the character's stats, moves, abilities, aesthetic, essentially anything you are used to within an RPG mechanic setting. Clive grows and advances as the story dictates that he should. New and better equipment is doled out strategically at certain moments in the game to ensure that you don't fall behind. Only 2 weapons and 1 set of armoured equipment can be missed as they appear in side quests. Everything else that upgrades you is available from vendors in your home hub as you advance. Even if you do miss those weapons and equipment, it will not affect your ability to complete the game at all. Clive has levels, and every time he levels up, you get a stats screen. But you can't influence it. And because it is a stationary, predetermined upgrade path that the game itself handles without your input, and enemies automatically level scale, you never feel like you're growing stronger. You feel your improvement in the mechanics and their execution, but it takes just as long to beat a foe at the end of the game as it does at the start of the game. But let's bring some positivity in now. And it's going to seem a bit weird after what I've just said, but the combat is brilliant. Considering there is very little change in combat from the start to the end of the game, and that fact has been a negative in titles like Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, for me to say it is brilliant after 40 plus hours with it should give you a sense of the core strength of combat. It has a very Devil May Cry God of War feel to it. It is serviceable at its entry level, but there is a skill ceiling allowing you to chain physical and magical attacks with dodges, parries, blocks, counterattacks, and icon abilities. There's even a trophy in the game for beating a boss without taking damage, which requires you to link all of these factors together seamlessly, even on the easiest bosses. And it is that natural evolution that is available to you from the word go that gives the combat such a satisfactory feeling. Fights become easier because you have gotten better, not because you've out-leveled the foe in front of you. You use less health potions and rage potions through the game because your improved performance means you simply need them less. The game tells you that you are improving, that your combat is more fluid, precise, and visceral. And as no new mechanics have been introduced, you realise this compliment is totally directed at you, the player. Combat of this nature is a fine balancing act. As previously mentioned, one of the most beloved games of all time is the Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. That had a very similar combat dynamic. Every skill that you would ever need within the game was available to you the moment that you took hold of the prince in the introduction. However, all of those skills were basic skills. Blocks blocked every attack from every direction, for example. Whereas in Final Fantasy XVI, blocks are an icon power unlocked partway through the game. Even when they are unlocked though, you can't block all damage. Attacks from behind your character will still hit you, for example, so you have to dodge out the way of those. If you block at the right time, you can perform a powerful counterattack, but mistime that, and you're taking the full brunt of the enemy attack. Parries and dodges fill this same mold, giving you plentiful options and challenges within general combat from the very start of the game. Then, adding icon powers into the mix can really change up the approach, layering healing, crowd control stuns, or ultra-powered strikes atop that solid base. Speaking of those icon powers, I think their implementation is great too. You collect additional attunements, essentially new skill tree aspects, as the game advances, and you can choose up to 3 icons and 2 abilities for each of those for use at any time. Each icon offers a variety of abilities, generally 2 utility, 2 attacking, and 1 ultra move, and their base circle button interaction varies icon by icon. What this means for the player is that you can vary your Clive slightly from that of another player, despite the missing RPG elements. For example, I used one icon to control mobs, locking them down with electrical attacks that hit multiple enemies at once, causing very little damage, but high uptime. I used another icon for stunning moves, essentially wiping out a larger boss-level foe's stamina gauge to give me an elongated free damage phase, where I then used the Phoenix icon powers that you start the game with to lay on big damage and offer some healing too. Combat and its extended mechanics are a huge part of the gameplay experience. I'd say over 80% of your actual input with the game, as a player, is combat. The other 20% is a mix of those conversations mentioned earlier and traversal. Traversal is serviceable. Jumps and parkour are fully choreographed. It can only happen at certain points in the game, and the game takes over the control and animation in those moments. It is still, however, more fluid, usable, and satisfactory than something like Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Even though just like Valhalla, you aren't in full control of it in Final Fantasy XVI, it works every time that you ask it of the game. On standard ground, you move without challenge. Your chocobo won't suddenly deposit you under the map or glitch out and launch you to your death, nor do you stub your toe and stop in the middle of a wide open field and suddenly become unable to move. It just works. And that shouldn't be a point in the positive column for doing the bare minimum. But so many titles overlook or don't care about that this experience was almost joyful just traversing when I realised I could stop waiting for the game to break. Because it wouldn't. And that's the biggest positive by far for me. Final Fantasy XVI is bug-free. Even in the best titles of the last few years, those of such high quality that they remain in the conversation even after the next generation has launched. Titles like Ghost of Tsushima Returnal and God of War. I encountered bugs and glitches in those games. Sure, most of the time these bugs were incredibly minor, either easily overlooked or overcome. But Final Fantasy XVI presented zero challenge in the bugs, glitches, and stability department. 40 plus hours of game time, and at no point did an asset freak out, did a mechanic break, did a character do something not in the script. The game never crashed, never failed to start or load, never took longer than was standard for the game to load a new area, sequence, or cutscene. This was, for what feels like the first time in 3 console generations, a flawless technical experience. But is it Final Fantasy? This is a question that I'm not well placed to answer. The last 2 Final Fantasy games that I have played are the original 7 and 16, so I don't have that franchise ownership or knowledge like longtime fans do. But I do have that in a different series. Assassin's Creed. Why do I bring that up? Because it allows me to empathise with the challenges the long-term fans are facing in this particular release, despite my personal love of it. In that way, Final Fantasy XVI is probably very like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It's better made with an actual story for sure, but the fanbase feeling seems nearly identical. Using that Assassin's Creed Odyssey reference, newcomers to Odyssey absolutely loved it. They loved the lack of modern-day storytelling. They loved the Assassin-Templar War was not in the game, because both of those factors are, and I quote, "too confusing to make a good game." I hope those sort of reviewers never turn their eyes towards Metal Gear Solid for fear that they may actually combust from the complexities. The lack of stealth, the RPG number mechanic metrics, the fact you could kill anyone, the fact you could climb anything, the lack of fall damage, the fantasy abilities, the ginormous, unused open world. Newcomers loved all of these aspects. They loved the mythical bosses and travelling to mythical magical lands. Because it was the same sort of thing that other games gave them. And suddenly, they could do all of that in Assassin's Creed as well. But the long-time fans like me, Fans who had been there since the very beginning of the franchise, who had made it into a worldwide celebrated IP that earned Ubisoft millions every single year, hated all of this. These design choices stripped Assassin's Creed of what made Assassin's Creed Assassin's Creed. The story was dumbed down, the lore was ignored, the realistic setting was thrown out of the window, the rules of the franchise that had been laid down throughout the series were not adhered to, and we were sold a badly designed game so that Ubisoft could sell further microtransactions to make it feel more normal thereafter. The core fanbase of Assassin's Creed felt ignored, betrayed, and let down, because they had been sold out, so that Ubisoft could please the mainstream by using their beloved series for that brand recognition, and just slapping its name on anything that will sell more. I know there are Zelda fans that feel similar about Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. While successful, many core Zelda fans feel like the franchise they fell in love with will never return, and the name will be used solely for giant, multi-hundred-hour open-world action games instead, because they sold better. Final Fantasy XVI isn't an RPG. Your levels mean nothing. You don't get skill points or acumen points that you can put into certain skills or attributes to build your Clive with, say, more HP than another, or make a glass cannon or utter tank. Every single Clive in every single Final Fantasy XVI has exactly the same numbers for the exact same levels, with exactly the same equipment and skills. Personalization has been dwindled down to the icon's powers, and even they are all set up with only 5 skills, 4 for general combat utility and 1 for ultra-powerful moves. Even I know this isn't the Final Fantasy experience that has been there for 15 previous games. Combat doesn't change throughout the game, only the icon powers do. Your combat grows stronger with new equipment, which is strategically doled out at certain points in the narrative to keep you at level, not through RPG mechanics. Your decisions do not affect the outcome of the story, either in the main narrative or in the side quests. You don't lose party members unless the one-track story decrees it. Over or under leveling isn't really possible to make bosses easier or harder. The world auto-scales to you, so you don't get issues going into certain areas or curb stomp earlier ones. And the map opening is so constrained that even if you wanted a challenge from the world around you, the latter areas are locked until certain moments in the story anyway. These are all things that long-time Final Fantasy players are speaking out against. Now, I love this game. It is, in my opinion, a very good, narratively driven action title, with a few pitfalls here and there. But I would hesitate to say that it fits the Final Fantasy mold. Combat feels very hack and slash, DMC, God of War, Darksiders type combat. Story is incredibly cinematic and told through beautifully rendered cutscenes, reminiscent of Metal Gear Solid 4. But the rest of the design and mechanics, they sort of fall into insignificance, or worse, forgetfulness, because they just don't impact the game experience. Final Fantasy is meant to be deep, and whilst thematically this game is, I don't think it achieves that otherwise. I can't say whether or not this is a Final Fantasy game. Creative Business Unit 3, the development studio, will say it definitely is. It also says it is upon the box. But just as with Assassin's Creed Odyssey for me, much of the core fanbase is saying that it isn't. So, maybe try and treat this as a good action game, rather than a Final Fantasy, to try and get the best out of it. And Square Enix? Try to honour your fans better in the next release. You can, of course, have combat and story the likes of which are in Final Fantasy XVI. In fact, I hope you do. But make sure that you don't alienate your fans with the other choices made in Final Fantasy XVII's design. In conclusion then, I think Final Fantasy XVI is a great game. I do not think it's for everybody, and even those that it is for, they may be turned off the game by design choices and the caveats I've outlined in this review. There are other factors that I personally deemed too minute to mention, things like Clive having 16 million scouting badges by the end of the game, and cutscenes stopping to make me activate fast travel to then launch into another cutscene, that could be a big impact for a different kind of player. For many, however, any and all caveats can be managed and mitigated by the high points of this title. the generally excellent narrative, the satisfying combat, and the bug-free experience. While not breaking any molds or doing anything particularly new, what Final Fantasy XVI does do is generally to a high standard. It's the Ghost of Tsushima feeling. Nothing new, but executed well. For the most part, this does apply to Final Fantasy XVI, with the odd miss like cutscene presentation. But on the whole, this is a great example of a game made and executed very well. I personally recommend Final Fantasy XVI. For the majority of players, it will be a great and satisfying experience. Just be aware of the challenges that do exist within the title going in. And if you have enjoyed this review, make sure to check out this one reviewing God of War Ragnarok, mentioned earlier. In the meantime, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Have yourselves a fantastic day. And take care.